After the Locust had succumbed to the emulsion countermeasure built by Adam Phoenix, it was assumed that the war was over and humanity had finally won. With billions gone due to the Locust war machine, and more to be buried afterwards concerning the Locust, the Cog were faced with a fairly interesting dilemma. What would they do with the fallen crystallized Locust? Upon realizing that they could not burn, crush, nor melt the Locust remains due to the crystalline structure that seemingly protected them, they would essentially take the bodies en masse to the mines where they would be housed and forgotten by time. But much like how a butterfly enters a chrysalis to begin its transformation, the locusts were going to do the same thing. 25 years later, humanity was slowly but surely recovering from the war with the locusts. Cities were being built by machines, breeding programs were started to reestablish humanity as the dominant and most widespread species, but as they spread out, instances of people being snatched up by creatures and taken somewhere began to mount. Nobody truly knew if it was happening or if it was just a tale told in bars, but as the Serans were about to learn, the war was far from over and people were still being converted. Deep within the mines, the locusts were waking back up, but this time they had changed. The leaders were sending out creatures which arguably may have been altered reavers, but we will discuss that in another episode. Anyways, they were sent out to abduct humans and bring them back to their hive. There, the humans would be melted down into their own metamorphosis and become juvies and swarm drones later on as they matured. The leader of this hive did not appear to be a singular queen, at least not at first. These leaders were large creatures known as Scions, and more specifically in Gears 4, it was known as the Speaker. Scions were responsible for going out at first and finding human settlements in which to abduct from. One Scion in particular, as said, known as the Speaker, was responsible for the raid on the outside village run by Reyna Diaz. This massive beast walked in and decimated the guards and began to attack Reyna. She held her own for a minute, but this massive creature would go on to take her back to the hive, where she would ultimately, and spoiler alert, well, sort of, it's in Gears 4, she would become part of the Nexus. At first, Scions were just dealing with outsiders of the Cog. Engagements with handhelds were fairly standard, but not too much armor was needed to combat these humans. However, as the Cog began to take notice, with their osmium armor and much more powerful force at their disposal, Scions would begin to take more specialized roles with stronger armor. Much of this armor was actually a naturally occurring structure on their body. First, we're going to start with your standard Scions. These beasts were much larger than the Locust drones were, and even Grenadiers for that matter. Interestingly, these creatures actually began as Locust drones rather than boomers as it's been suggested, but due to their size increase, they're able to wield the same equipment as a boomer was able to. So, time for like a momentary side tangent, which if you've ever watched this channel before, you know I generally go on these. Have you noticed that all the creatures got larger? Humans turned into swarm drones, which obviously would be larger than our original starting point, and Locust drones became Scions, and so on and so forth. Why is this? Well, from what we know with the emulsion, not only can it change your genetics, but it's also considered to be somewhat of a parasite, seeking out hosts to not only consume, but to consume for it. Shortly after the counter-emulsion waves were deployed, the emulsion was destroyed across the planet, but this had an added effect of clearing the emulsion from every individual cell. So I would go out on a limb and say that the locusts, had they not originally, and from the beginning really, been infected by the emulsion, they would have been a much larger species and would have been even more devastating. I believe that what we are seeing with the swarm are actually the sizes they were supposed to be. So cover your ears if you don't want to hear a spoiler. When you descend down into New Hope with Niles, he will release a bunch of original locusts on you. So why are they living when all others have been destroyed? The emulsion in these locusts is for sure still prevalent. When the waves passed through this area, I believe one of two things may have happened. Either A, there was enough ground and water above it to shield it from the effects of the counter-emulsion measure, or even perhaps maybe the tubes themselves had shielding, but I kind of seriously doubt that, because this raises the question, how was the emulsion underground destroyed? So I believe that it's actually more than likely B. Due to the freezing, the waves did in fact pass through the emulsion contained within the bodies of the Locust drones. However, due to their stasis, the emulsion was not able to be destroyed because it was essentially frozen in place. And to go with this point, it seems as though the waves were a source of energy, perhaps operating on a resonance frequency. If you don't know what a resonance frequency is basically the idea that everything ever that contains matter, which anything you see pretty much contains matter, has a point in which it will start to resonate with energy, and if you find the correct resonating frequency, you may be actually able to destroy it or at least rip it apart. But anyways, considering that the resonators were a terrible attempt to map the tunnels, the Serans were definitely experimenting with frequency technology. So the resonant frequency was found with the emulsion that would destroy it, but not harm the host if they were human, because the human cell has a different resonant frequency. This frequency passed through the fluid of the emulsion, completely blowing it apart, but with frozen emulsion, the frequency changed, thus allowing the drones to be able to exit their cryotubes and begin attacking without suffering the ill effects of 25 years previous. Okay, so back to Scions now. Based upon upon what I have said, we can now understand the morphological changes of the locust drones. Your typical Scion is a behemoth, standing roughly 9 feet 8 inches tall. This comes out to roughly 2.94 meters tall. This means that they are actually just about as tall as Rom was, but much more plentiful and arguably more ferocious. And before you freak out, that's because Rom was more cunning than bloodlusty. Anyhow, you already know where this has to begin, because like all good stories, starting with the feet, we see that Lieutenant Dan, you ain't got no toes. Well, you have toes, but the number has been decreased to 3 toes on each foot. Each toe is essentially equal in size and tipped with a white claw, though there would actually be no need for this to be used in battles. The shins are a tough area to get a look at due to the armor placed on them, but judging by the thickness of the armor, these shins are massive. In a typical human, the circumference of your lower leg is smaller than that of your quads. Not on a Scion. The calves and shins equal out to about the same size as the thigh. Speaking of quads, the armor is lacking in this area. Instead, bare minimum is strapped over the thighs, really just to keep a loincloth that they wear in place. Thank God dignity has lasted after 25 years. This is more than likely because due to the raw size and power of this creature, anything fired from a handheld will actually not do that much damage because it won't really pierce the muscle that deep. Around the lower abdomen, there appears to be some protection. Holding up the loincloth appears to be an ammo bag on the sides and a large metal belt protecting their internal organs. Moving up to the abdomen, we see Homeboy is Swoggles, possessing a six-pack and obliques that no matter how hard I try, I will never obtain. Interestingly, we can see some leftover crystals formed around the sides, which appears as a slight discoloration. I'm sorry, but moving up to the thoracic region, Swole! My boy's been lifting. The pectoral muscles are completely massive, which will come into play later on. Moving down, we should see that there is some leftover crystals, and it appears that some swarm will shed these crystals, but others will retain them, which we will also cover with the Warden momentarily. The biceps and triceps are much larger than anything that could be normally obtained by humans. The shoulders coupled with the triceps and chest allows a Scion to lift a fully armored human into the air with ease with just one arm. The forearms are about proportionally large, and strangely, despite the toes only numbering 3, all 5 fingers are on each hand. Each finger is about half as long as a normal forearm on a human and tipped with claws for hand-to-hand combat. Moving around the backside of the Scion, we see that discoloration caused by the crystals is quite more prevalent. The shoulder blades in particular are lined as they continue up to the base of the skull, and the skull looks fairly similar to the original locust drone face that they originally had. The teeth are razor sharp like pinpoint needles, the nose is flat and pressed into the face, and the eyes are white and milk colored. In typical standard fashion, there is no hair on its head, so they're basically just baldies. So your standard Scion will appear like this with varying levels of crystals on their body, but it seems that those destined for more will sport more crystals than their brethren. This may be for hierarchy reasons, but concerning the speaker specifically, the crystals run up the side of the head and cover a lot more of him. This makes him stand out and gives hints that he may actually be more than just your typical run-of-the-mill Scion. And actually, he is. And here's why. Now, way back in the day when I made a video over Rom, everyone about it because they tried to tell me that he was a Theron. No, actually he was a locust drone. I would implore you, go read the lore. Albeit a massive locust drone, but a drone nonetheless. He rose through the ranks and eventually would go on to lead the Therons, but the Therons were their own subspecies. But the key here is that within the drones, leaders are born out of this class, despite them being the lowly foot soldiers. And without a queen, they become the leaders of the swarm as they look to install the next queen for their nexus. But these leaders have a classification. They are known as wardens. Wardens are sent out to spread the influence of the swarm and convert areas into hives. But they are not just your normal Scion running about there and looking around. They are often sent out alone and have little to fear from the humans running underfoot. The reason is that their body is absolutely covered in this indestructible crystal. The crystals will completely deflect incoming projectiles, making your handheld virtually useless. The wardens wield 2 massive breaker maces as well. These maces are composed of crystals that are the same crystals on their body and can easily break through osmium armor or human skulls. The raw power the Warden has backs up this ability and can make short work of entire squads should they be encountered. Then the Warden is free to continue on and convert that area into a hive. When encountering a Warden, the only real offense you have is ironically the most vulnerable place for the creature. Its body is indestructible, so you must knock off its helmet. Upon doing so, it'll reveal its nice, soft, supple face just aching for projectiles to hit it. This is the only way you can truly bring down a Warden. Another thing to note about the Scions is much like the Cantus locusts that used to reside within the hollow, they seem to act as sort of medics for down-swarmed soldiers. They will release a gas that seems to rally them, but do you know what this gas is? It's osmium. This appears to be due to the fact that they resided in the osmium mines, and during their transformation, it's possible that this element became ingrained in them somehow, and adding this element assists them and has really become part of their biological makeup. Pretty interesting. Someday I may dive a little more into this if possible, but I'm not really sure how osmium affects the body as of yet. But now let's talk about what happens if you're a total scrub that gets taken out by one of these brutes. And let's just say they like to get up close and personal. For some reason, you thought it was a good idea to run in with your chainsaw, thinking, yeah, I can totally chainsaw that 10-foot tall monster, just like Kim did with Rom. Well, that wasn't such a great plan, because now you are attempting to crawl back after your handheld was taken and smacked you in the face. Your typical Scion will pick you up by your head, and with one quick motion, it will completely crush your skull with its hands. What do brains feel like as they run between your fingers? Probably pretty gross. The Warden prefers to keep his hands clean. Due to the durability of his breaker maces, it will use this mace to not only pierce your armor, but pulverize your spine as well. When it does this, you would go into immediate neurogenic shock and would almost completely be knocked unconscious, but that really doesn't matter. The breaker mace is also good for breaking heads. It will use the other mace to come down on the top of your skull, and good lord, that is a lot of focus force on one small area. I think even Negan from The Walking Dead would be proud of this move. So it's best just to keep your distance and chuck as many grenades as possible. So anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, leaving a like helps the video get out there, and subbing is a great way to keep up with the channel. A video over a breakthrough with the Alzheimer's disease is on my second channel, Croto and Medical, if that interests you. And I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, merch, and Patreon links in the description if you'd like to support the channel. And I'd like to thank a few of my patrons. So of course, huge shout out to It's Not a Spoon and Laffy No Skill. I also want to thank Freedom Units 44, Skilt, Cable, and Trey Windinall, as well as the rest of my patrons. You guys help out a lot supporting this channel, and it goes a long way. All right, anyhow, go check out that Alzheimer's video linked in the pinned comment. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.